welcome to episode 2 of The Witching Hour. I am Perri Nemiroff, and I am so excited yet again to be joined by my co-host, Haleigh Pouch.
Hey, guys.
So, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm especially good. You know why?
Why?
Because this podcast gave me an excuse to rewatch Halloween H20.
Yes.
So today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about Halloween H20, its legacy, and that will obviously lead us perfectly into a conversation about 90s slasher movies, which for anybody who knows my horror taste, that's where I came from.
Yeah, I think we fall in line there. Those were the movies that really made me a horror fanatic.
So one of the things I want to start with here with Halloween H20, because I don't know if you're the same, but I can vividly remember my first H20 viewing experience.
Yeah, I know that I saw it in theaters. It was my first Halloween movie in theaters, but my big memory of it isn't the first time I saw it. It was rewatching it over and over and over again, and particularly one day, my best friend and I were in a limousine for some reason, and we just kept looping it in the back and the TV in the back while we were riding it around.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No,
whatsoever.
It was great.
I actually didn't see it in the theater, even though that was right about the time where I had to see. That became my thing, especially in high school with my group of friends. That became, was it even high school at that point? Probably. Yeah, it should have been. Math. Again, no, it wasn't.
No,
it
math.
wasn't.
It wasn't yet.
It wasn't high school yet.
No.
But that at that point was kind of becoming my thing, where it was almost even like a challenge, where I just had to see if I could, get through them all. And that was the point in my life where I stopped doing the look at the corner of the screen trick.
Oh.
And I started actually watching and appreciating all the wonderful, bloody, gory visual effects. But with that movie, I didn't see it in the theaters, but Mark Ellis is going to get really mad at me because for whatever reason, he doesn't like the term sleepaway camp. He thinks it should just be called camp. But whenever my sister and I went away to camp, so the thing was with camp is one morning over the summer, you would board the buses. It was just a big deal. Like, you go to the bus stop and you go away. And the night before, we would always watch a movie together. And I vividly remember watching Halloween H20 before going off to camp one summer. And there's just so many visuals from that movie that are seared into my brain, particularly the ice skate to the face.
Oh, yeah.
When I saw that, I feel like that immediately turned it into something that I was going to never forget and watch and rewatch happily.
That image and then the final shot are two things that, never left my mind. It's funny, that year was also, I believe, The Faculty came out, and those two movies were just my cycle that year. All I watched was The Faculty H20, The Faculty H20.
I'm not going to tap into my Faculty obsession yet because we'll save that for the 90s section, but I did see that in theaters, and that is also one I will never, ever forget. The other visual that I have seared in my brain from H20, though, is that moment where Josh Hartnett is trying, when they get locked in the little cage area, and they just timed it so perfectly where Laurie and Michael's faces appear and meet each other in that little circle window so perfectly. And it just gives you chills, especially with everything she's going through at the beginning of the movie. Because that's actually one of the most interesting things, rewatching Halloween H20 now, knowing what they're doing with that new Halloween movie. Because this one is one of few that really, I think, tries to dig into the whole PTSD and what happens after you experience something like that. And I think it does it pretty effectively. But I have a feeling what we're going to get in this new movie is a more layered, deeper exploration of the pure terror rather than, let's say, the 90s slasher vibe, the fun 90s slasher vibe we got from this one.
Also, I think Jamie Lee Curtis has talked about this.
She's just so freaking good.
She's amazing.
That was my reaction to that every single time. I'm sorry. I'm just so distracted by that because ever since the whole thing at Comic-Con,
I know.
It's just every single time I see her, it's like, do you ever do wrong?
No, she's amazing.
She doesn't. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay. She's talked about how they started that film with the best of intentions. They really wanted to do Laurie Strode right and tell a final chapter of her story and treat it with, integrity and address the PTSD, the functioning alcoholic element, what kind of parent do you become? But that didn't become the focus of the film ultimately. And so, I think she said recently, like, it started with good intentions and then it became a paycheck movie. And when I was on set for Halloween, she talked a bit about it as well. And really, she wanted that to be Laurie's final chapter, a send-off, which is why it ends so, triumphantly and strong. But of course, the money men were like, yeah, but we need another sequel, which is why she came back one last time to send Laurie off for good. Oops. Mm-hmm. And my point to all this is I get that those themes are important to her, the ones she wanted to do in H2O, but just couldn't quite go fully in depth on. And I absolutely think that is what was probably the key draw for her to come back to this one, is that it is taking those themes as serious as could be.
Yeah.
It's digging deep into that PTSD well.
Even if she did look at this movie, or at least eventually look at it as a paycheck movie, I feel like oftentimes when that winds up being the case, you can get a little sense of that in the performance. She still gave Halloween H2O every ounce of herself. I mean, there's certain things where I'm sitting and, listening to a certain bit of dialogue and thinking to myself, that shouldn't quite work. But somehow she manages to sell it. And, it was one of the first times I had ever seen Josh Hartnett, too.
Oh, yeah.
And he plays that role pretty well, where this movie still has, again, that fun 90s teen slasher vibe, where I got that same entertainment value out of a lot of the other movies that I was seeing at that time. But there's also some real genuine heart to that relationship between him and his mother, where I think some of the strongest stuff is that, actually. And, it's kind of fun to think about this given what we're going to get in the new Halloween movie. I think that stuff works a lot better than when he's busy dealing with, high school drama or those cliches. They're still fun to watch, but some of the stuff that's going on with the foursome in that movie, it's a little ridiculous.
Well, and the thing about the performances that I really enjoy, and it's the same with Michelle Williams, these are all actors who seek to bring integrity to their performances. Like, even if they're making a little slasher film, Josh Hartnett hasn't had the career a lot of people expected him to have, and I think that's because he didn't want to take the kind of roles people wanted him to take. He really takes it seriously, as does Jamie Lee, clearly, and Michelle Williams is a great actress. So we get those more deep performances than you might expect from, like, it was the seventh Halloween film, the seventh film in a franchise. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong. But so that's that last thing you hit on. That's sort of the interesting element of H2O, though, is that it's a two-fisted sort of punch that doesn't come together perfectly, in that it's got the high school teenage stuff, the Kevin Williamson, and it's got the OG legacy arc with Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers, and it's trying to do both, and I find that fascinating.
I find it fascinating. I think that's why I've been able to appreciate it so much over the years. It's just, I don't think those two sides of the movie meld as well as maybe they should have or could have, but the fact that they both exist and they both work well, that's kind of what's kept me watching and rewatching this thing and enjoying it and feeling something every single time I do. I mean, it's no masterpiece, but I do think it's effective as it needs to be to have me enjoy it and have a special place in my heart for it.
I love it. I agree. I mean, like, on a technical level, those two things don't come together as evenly as you'd hope, and the movie is pretty slow for about 45 minutes, and the mask is atrocious. I think there are like 5 masks in it.
The mask and the physicality of Michael Myers. I mean, when you watch something like this, that's when you appreciate Nick Castle more than ever. I mean, I really don't think that registered because I had seen the first Halloween, but not to the point where, like, I think I had seen it, a slumber party type setting where it was more about the game of, like, we should put this on now. And I wasn't really paying attention, but it wasn't until that I watched Halloween H2O in particular and then went back and rewatched the original. And you really start to understand that, that's not just any old extra in a mask walking around. There's something about the physical presence of Michael Myers that also contributes to the horror of who he is, the mentality of what he's up to, in addition to the score, the way he's shot, all that kind of stuff, the lighting. That is important. And here, there's certain jerky movements, I think, that bother me, where all of a sudden he'll do, like, look around, you know? I mean, people on video can see me do that, but you know where you like snap your neck to look behind?
Yeah.
Like that's something that the original Michael Myers never did.
There were a few movements that stuck out to me on this particular rewatch. Again, I really love this movie and I've seen it a lot of times, but I think I was watching it a little more critically on the 20th anniversary, and there were a few movements that it's not just how he moves, it's also the way he's shot, that it was like, ooh, that's almost a spoof of Michael Myers. Like there was one part with LL Cool J in the security stand, and every time he turns away, Mike Myers pops up in the background, and then when he turns back, he goes away. And it was a little too intentional.
Yeah.
That gave me a chuckle. But just as much, there's a part where you see his body lying prone in the background and he slowly sits up sort of rigid, and I was like, see, that's effective.
Yeah.
That's what we look for.
They do get it sometimes.
Yeah.
They get it sometimes, but I wish they had gotten it more often than not. I also had wished in rewatching it too that some of the kill scenes were a little more original. You know, we have that stuff in the kitchen with what's that thingy called, where you got to send stuff up and down,
the elevator,
the pulley thing,
the dummy elevator. I don't know what it's
dummy
is
elevator.
that it? I might have made that up.
Dummy waiter.
Dummy waiter, maybe.
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah. Wow.
But I wish a couple of them had a little more flair like that, because a lot of the times, especially when I'm looking back at horror movies that shaped my love of the genre, part of the reason that some will stick with me, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about the opening with the skate to the face. Mm-hmm. That was something I had never seen, and it had that, holy shit kind of reaction out of me. I think if some of the scenes further into the movie, when you got to the meat of the kill sequences, had that same kind of visual flair or originality, I would have been talking about Halloween H20 much more than I ever did.
It's interesting because I find that like the original horror or the original Halloween doesn't necessarily stand out to me because of the kills, which are that film is rooted in simplicity, and it's because of its sort of holistic elegance that everything works in spite of the fact that those kills aren't necessarily super creative.
See, but this movie lost that
exactly.
elegance. So if it loses the elegance, it needs to fill that void with something else.
No, I agree. And so you have Steve Miner directing, who did, I believe, 2 of the...
2 Friday the 13th.
Yes. So that, that skate to the head that's Friday the 13th. That's not really a Halloween kill. That's more Friday the 13th. I mean,
don't we even have a Jason mask in this?
Oh, is there?
Is there a Jason mask in
I
this?
would buy
or am
it.
I thinking about something else? I could have sworn there's
I don't
a
know.
Jason
We'll have
mask
to
in
look
this
that
movie
up.
somewhere.
I buy it. But it's an interesting combination, not just of like, this is why I find this film so fascinating, because it's not just the old school Halloween meeting 90s slasher. It's also like the Friday the 13th aesthetic coming into the Halloween world, and how much does that work?
There's also the Scream aesthetic too.
Oh, absolutely.
There's, particularly in the score, there's a couple stingers that are very, very reminiscent of that.
Well, because the score for the score was a disaster, just like The Mask kind of, and they ended up using some of the original score for Halloween for this film, as well as a number of other things, temp scores, and Marco Beltrami, I believe, came in and had 5 days to create a score from it because they just didn't like what the original score was. The studio people were like, no. So it's this sort of hatchet job score mixed from Scream and this new one and the original score.
I think there's one in particular. I feel like it's one of the scenes where Michelle Williams and Josh Hartnett are kind of escaping the murder of the other two, and it reminds me of. It takes me right back to the third act of Scream, when Sydney in particular is running around the house. I mean, you could pretty much cut and paste that same exact score in either movie, and it's very, very similar.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting moment too, because you talk about the lack of original kills. Really, the only like sizable moment of horror action is that small piece when they're in the kitchen and those two get killed, and then he comes after Josh Hartnett and Michelle Williams, and from then it's more the cat and mouse between Jamie Lee and Michael Myers. But those are really the only two big moments of like, fuck, he's gonna get you.
Other ting that, it's just the opening.
Yeah.
The opening, I think, in addition to the skate to the face, is also especially well done, where it kind of ping pongs back and forth between the neighbor and the two kids, and I think does it really well. And it's great to have someone like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in that role. And also this speaks to Josh Hartnett's performance too, where, but more so with Jimmy. Jimmy is, obnoxious and highly unlikable, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt has this, swagger to him in that role and that charm where he's fun to watch. And instantly, even though you only meet these three characters for a couple of minutes, you're a part of what they are as neighbors, and you're kind of rooting for them to come together and succeed, and just watching that whole thing spiral out of control is very exhilarating.
I love it, and I'm a huge Joseph Gordon-Levitt fan. That also is no surprise being a 90s baby, but I love that he can play this swaggering little twit, and you're like, oh, he's gonna die. That's kind of sad, but also he sucks.
Yeah. But
that's the power of Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's horrible, but you're kind of sad he's gonna die.
Yeah, that is what they accomplish in that opening sequence there. I also have to give a little love to LL Cool J.
Oh yeah,
I really like him as the comedic relief in this movie, because also when it hits the point, I think they work in the conversations with the wife very well, and the idea of him being the security guard and coming up with these like erotica stories. It's it's not too far fetched. He's in that little booth all day. He's coming up with something creative, and I love the back and forth with him and his wife.
Yeah.
It's a wife, right?
I believe so.
Him telling her about his work, and it's her on the phone. That's a very effective voice performance where you can kind of feel like the love and the sassy vibe to their relationship, and it hits the point where when you think he's dead in the movie, my heart hurt a little bit.
I know. Well, that was also maybe my number one most irritating point in the film, is when Adam Arkin picks her gun out of her hand, fires blindly into the dark, wastes all her bullets, and accidentally hits a good guy. Like, I know he's not going to survive the film, but if he did, dump him.
Yeah.
Like, he's the worst.
Yeah.
Anyone who takes your gun out of your hand in a horror movie is a fireable offense. You're gone.
It's true. He goes back and forth. There's certain moments where I'm like, oh, he's going to be so good for her. And then there's other things like, I know it's because he doesn't believe her right off the bat, but his reactions to her telling the truth.
Yeah.
That's just
pretty gross.
That's not right. Yeah, there's certain things that whether or not you believe someone, if someone is saying something along those lines, I don't know. My first thought wouldn't be to respond the way he does.
Take off your clothes.
Take off your clothes.
Gross.
That line is wouldn't fly nowadays.
No,
that's
it's very 90s.
Sure.
Before we abandon LL Cool J entirely, I do want to sing his praises a little bit more, because I also just rewatched Deep Blue Sea with the Meg coming out, and I think he's a really underrated comedic element in 90s films. He was fantastic in that one as well.
I will give him that credit.
Yeah.
So do you want to add anything about Halloween H20, or move into the legacy portion of our discussion?
Yeah, we can talk about the legacy.
So what is it to you? Like, when I say the legacy of Halloween H20, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
The first thing that comes to my mind is divided fans, because a lot of people love it, a lot of people absolutely hate it. The second thing that comes to my mind is the ending, which was almost an all-time great until they undid it. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, definitely both of those things. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying about my reaction to the movie at the beginning. It's, 1998, right? Mm-hmm. This was the point in my life where I kind of started to teeter on the edge, because it had come right after Scream, and Scream is basically the movie that shaped me as a horror lover and took it to a different level. It wasn't just a game anymore at that point. That's when I started to appreciate the craft behind horror and the real character development and the drama you could have in something like that. Whereas before, it was more what I was saying before, where it's going to slumber parties, and it's basically, who could watch the scariest scene amongst your friends. So this kind of hit at a perfect time in my life where I was able to appreciate the fun entertainment value of a slasher movie while also seeing some real drama and character development. And I don't think they were merged together very well, but it was a weird thing to have something that tapped into both sides of it also hit at that same point in my life where I was seeing both of those things represented at the same time. But, you know, when it comes to its legacy going beyond that with the fandom, I think this was the point in time when we started to see the scale tip in the, in the wrong direction, where the idea of continuing on certain horror franchises was slowly dying down in a way, because after this was pretty much the age of the rise of new franchises and also reboots.
Yeah.
Complete reboots.
Yeah, it's this whole period in horror, the 90s teen horror films were so formative to me, and they happened so quickly, like in my memory space. It was, I mean, even looking at the actual dates of when these were released, they really happened quickly. This whole whole cycle of films was really like 4 years. And this came towards the tail end of it, and that makes it almost even more fascinating to me that it was the one to actually dip back into the sort of classic realm, being at the end of this new sort of trend of slasher films. Mm-hmm. But it also, it's just a fascinating, it's not a meta horror film, but it is in its existence a meta horror film. And so it's taking from Scream. It's got Kevin Williamson, who didn't technically get a writer's credit. He got producer, but that was just sort of a technicality thing. He wrote a lot. They're watching Scream 2 in the background, which if you think about how overlapping these films are, for not only Scream to have happened, but Scream 2, for that impact to be felt, and then the movie make its way into this Halloween sequel that came out like a year later or something. It's sort of crazy how they all reflect in on each other, like this house of mirrors.
And it obviously made me want to go and run to get Scream 2.
Of course.
Which, sadly, I actually tried to do that after I finished watching H20, but I was getting ready to board an airplane, and I only have it on my iCloud, and I couldn't download it, and I was so mad. So I might have just rewatched half of Halloween H20 instead, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
It does feel like a little bit of a not montage. That's the wrong collage.
Yeah,
like it feels like it's like a capper of that period in horror to me, but it's a collage of all the immediate things that came before it, plus some of the OG Halloween vibe that I love so much too, which is an interesting way to pave the way into the early 2000s.
And it's got the another meta quality in the casting of Janet Leigh.
Oh, yeah.
And they have, the car has the same license plate as Psycho, and you hear just a tiny little lilt of the Psycho score when she walks up.
That's another thing that's interesting with revisiting it later in my life, because the first time that I saw that,
we were too young.
I didn't know.
No.
I didn't know. And
I didn't know anything.
I do vividly remember thinking, like, what was the point of that? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, you grow up, and the movie grows with you, and you start to appreciate new things. I mean, that's what's so exciting to me about movies in general, that, especially the ones you love, you can keep watching and rewatching and get something new out of them every single time. And, when I put a little microscope on this specific time period for horror, I think for me, I can only speak for myself personally, those were my formative years. Those were the most important years to me, and I just love digging back into that whole lineup.
It's such a fascinating period of intertextuality in film anyway, and the more we're talking about it, the more I'm realizing that this movie in particular was almost like a crescendo on that trend in slasher films, where I guess it would be safe and fair to say they were self-cannibalizing at that point, but I don't care. I love Halloween H20.
Yeah, as do I. I can't think of any big one that had a release date after this one. Because as we were talking about before we started recording, it's like, my like history mind of what I was watching at that time, it pretty much jumps from I believe it jumps from Halloween H2O to Final Destination. If we're sticking in the slasher-ish genre.
Yeah, Halloween H2O was, I believe, definitely like the biggest horror film the year it was released, and I don't think anything came close in terms of box office success like that after. But there was Idle Hands after, and there was Cherry Falls, which technically falls in 2000, but is definitely a hangover from the 90s.
Yeah, I don't think Idle Hands popped as much, but that's another one that I have a pretty big soft spot for.
I have a soft spot for it.
Hey, we're kids of the 90s. I love Devon Sawa.
You know what? I just rewatched that one last year for the first time in a long time, and it's not good.
No.
But I sure did have a hoot and a half rewatching it.
Yeah, I mean, with that one, I have to play the nostalgia card a little more heavily than I might with some of the others. Where on my last rewatch of that, it's like, oh, I think I'm only loving certain parts of it because I still love him, and also because I remember watching it and rewatching it and getting a kick out of it.
I'll give it credit though; it's weird.
It is weird.
Like that is a weird, far out, embrace your freak flag movie.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you wouldn't see very many studios embrace a concept like that nowadays. So do you want to start to pick apart all these 90s slasher movies?
Yeah.
There's a lot. There's
so many.
Just, to launch into this portion of the conversation and to reiterate how important this period of cinema was in my life. I mean, there is no doubt that a lot of the things that I'm drawn to today is because of the group of films that we are going to discuss right now.
Very
Do you want
much
to kick
the
it off
same.
with anything in particular?
So it's funny. I've always, for me, like the start of my obsession, and it's obviously the same for you, was Scream.
Yeah. That's why I tossed it to you, because everyone out there knows that's the first one that would come to my mind.
Well, it's interesting though. I would be remiss in discussing like the 90s teen horror without referencing the new book that just came out by Alexandra West, who's a great horror critic and scholar, and I had the opportunity to meet her recently on a work trip, and she's also just a lovely, nice girl. But she's really super smart, and I regretfully have not made it very far into her book yet.
What's the book called?
I think it's just called the 1990s Teen Horror Cycle, Final Girls and something else. I'm so sorry, Alex. It's too many words for me to remember.
Keep going. That's why I got a computer here.
But it's... I gotta be honest with you guys, like 50 pages into it, but so far just super impressed with the quality of the analysis and her affection for this time period in horror. And anyway, the reason I bring it up, because this is absolutely her line of thinking, and I've got to give her credit for it. She dates really the start of it back to the Buffy the Vampire Slayer film.
Yeah.
And
what year was Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
The film?
Yeah.
Great question.
I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, because the TV show, I think, started 1 year later, so it was a super quick thing. But, and something she points out, so was it 95, 96? Something like that.
92 is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I'm way off.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, then that would make sense. It's way before Scream. And one of the things that I picked up from her book that was a very good point was... Joss Whedon, who wrote the film, has since more or less dismissed it as not his vision and, just a studio product. Mm-hmm. But the point of his script and what he said over and over again is that he wanted to take the character of the blonde girl in horror movies who's always being killed and say, but what if she could fight back? And that, I think, is a really underlying theme of the 90s stretch of slashers, is that it's not as much about watching these kids die. It's watching these kids fight to survive. You don't root for Ghostface. You root for Sidney Prescott. And, I think that's real smart to bring it back to Joss Whedon.
You're making such a meaningful, valid point, and then my mind immediately went to, probably because we were just discussing it before, but Final Destination.
Yeah.
Yeah, Final Destination does have characters I root for. It's, Devon Sawa in the first one, AJ Cook in the second one, the list goes on and on. But, as much as I love the trend of turning that whole concept on its head and rooting for your final girl, I would have to admit that there is a definite thrill to seeing people get picked off one by one. I mean, really, my favorite format of slasher movie is that group of friends and watching them all go in inventive ways, as sick and twisted as that sounds. So I think, especially in the 90s, one of my favorite things had been seeing writers strike an appropriate balance where it gave you that thrill. I mean, it goes back to the Halloween H20 concept. It goes to having the thrill and the entertainment value of seeing that happen when it's a genre you're drawn to, but then also having real heart and meaning and something a little more to chew on, to think about in that. And that's what I think that the Final Girl trend brought to the genre more so, or turning it around at least, brought to it more so than anything.
Yeah, I would point out that Final Destination represents the end of that period in films, by which point the allegiances had shifted again.
Yeah.
But for to look at the Scream films, which absolutely deliver satisfying deaths, that sort of 10 Little Indians setup where everyone's going to get picked off one by one, but you're never happy to see them go necessarily in the way you were in the Friday the 13th films, where you're like, oh, get rid of that idiot. It was more like, oh God, no, she just got stuck in the door and now she's dead. That's terrible.
It's funny, as you were explaining that, my mind immediately went to the Tatum death, where it's this weird push-pull between holy shit, that just happened, and no, like, she was the best.
It's heartbreaking. She's the best friend. Like, your path into this film is through Sydney. She's Sydney's best friend, so she's your best friend, and you're sad to see her go. And she's essentially playing the slutty blonde. Yeah. But it's spinning it all on its head.
A slutty blonde, but the spinning it on its head, where she's a very strong female character.
She's super empowered in her sluttiness.
Who doesn't let anybody else push her around. She does what she does, and she owns it. Yeah. And that's why she's such a powerful character in that movie.
Yeah, and that's why it sucks to see her go.
I know, but it's such a cool death.
It is.
A while ago, I was doing, because it was when Scream 4 was coming out. And I felt really guilty about this, but I did it anyway. So, we meet a whole bunch of great directors, great actors and everything all the time. Mm-hmm. So one day Wes Craven was doing an online, a Twitter contest where he was asking really difficult questions from Scream. And I felt like such an asshole competing in it, but I couldn't help it. And it wasn't that, I wanted to win the signed poster or anything that badly, because, I was fortunate enough to get to meet him, and he's wonderful, but I wanted to play the game. Yeah. I wanted to play the game so bad. And the question that I answered correctly the quickest, and I won a signed Scream 4 poster by Wes Craven, is how many beer bottles was she holding in her hand? And of course, now I can't remember the right answer. I think it might be 5?
5, okay.
I think it might be 5.
I'd believe you.
But yeah, so
That's funny.
I have a beautifully framed Scream 4 poster signed by Wes Craven, and I'll always think about that scene. Scream
4 is another late, delayed sequel to a slasher franchise that I'll always fight for.
That one worked pretty well for me. I don't think it definitely didn't hit my sky high standards for my second. I mean, Scream isn't just my favorite horror movie; it's my second favorite movie of all time. Yeah. I really adore that movie, as sick and twisted as that sounds, but it never would meet those standards, but I really did appreciate a lot of the things they did in that movie, particularly the opening, the cold open. I thought was just absolutely brilliant and really captured so much of the franchise in its entirety. And I'll just never, ever forget my first reaction to the Emma Roberts reveal, where I'm watching her do that end, and I'm like, oh boy, what is she doing? Yeah. This is weird and wonderful, and I never saw it coming.
It was a gutsy, sort of, messy, but gutsy movie that was the natural progression of sort of Scream's intent to subvert and intertextualize the horror slasher. It's not totally successful. I guess it's very similar to Halloween H20 in that it's not totally successful at rekindling what the original did, but it's an interesting next step.
Yeah, no, I would say so. What about Scream 2? How do you look at that one? I mean, is it an interesting next step?
I love Scream 2.
As do I.
It's not like the full home run that the first one is, but I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. I like the, we're talking about, teen slasher flicks, but I think one of the best decisions they made was to do the continuation from high school to college, because you can immediately keep the same idea of, the meta, the Sydney being your final girl, and the idea of Ghostface hunting people down. But when you put it in the college setting,
now she gets to go to film class.
That immediately changes everything just enough, though, where like you could keep so much of the original but put it in this new setting, and it just creates this whole new fun landscape to play in, like, film class, the frat element of it, her performing.
Oh yeah, the theater.
God. Yeah. Remember when she starred in that play?
Oh yeah, she was a great Cassandra.
Yeah.
I love it, and it's still technically teens. They were 19 in that movie, but
that was something that I was telling you I kept struggling with in coming up with this list. Is because when I think of teen slasher flicks, I immediately go high school.
Right,
but you're a teenager for some of college. I mean, I have a November birthday. I was a teen for a lot of college.
That's a good one. That police car scene is still an all-timer for me in building tension. Every time I watch it, I just want to turn off the TV and go for a jog or something.
That's a favorite. And when, going back to the idea of visuals that are seared in your brain, when I saw Scream 2, one of the things that I did the corner of the screen thing for a while with was Randy's death scene.
Oof,
I had a very hard time looking at that for a while, and then all of a sudden, you look, and it is what it is, and that's it.
Such a good scene.
That's a pretty creepy sequence.
That's such a gutsy sequence too, because it's in public in broad daylight, and it still works.
Because that immediately sets the tone where you're never safe.
You're never
safe. It's like the first movie establishes right off the bat that you're not safe at home, and now all of a sudden in that movie you're not safe in public either.
It's Randy, so no one's safe.
Exactly.
Oh, it's such a good scene. There are a lot of really great ones. The sound booth sequence is just
I love that
perfectly
one.
executed. Also,
that's got a great music cue too. It's like when you think Dewey's bit in the dust.
Yeah.
When you see the two of them looking at each other, or kind of looking at each other.
So good.
Oh my God!
It's
and
so
just
good.
The score booms in a way there that just takes the emotion to like an 11.
Absolutely. Another thing that was really hard for me to watch, and I think this was again, they were being more subtly meta and intertextual, was killing Sarah Michelle Gellar that way. She's fucking Buffy. Yep. She doesn't go out that way. And he just chucks her over the side of a building. That was really hard to watch as the world's biggest Buffy fan. That
nice
hit hard.
That connect to so many things from the original too. It's like, you don't go up the stairs. Right. She went up the stairs, and look what happened because of it.
Yeah. But
oh my God, we didn't even talk about the opening of that movie. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, that is hands down, of all the Scream movies, one of my favorite scenes of all time, where, I mean, even still to this day, I go to a restroom in a movie theater and I'm picturing him putting his ear up against the thing. And, that's another thing where a murder happens in public. And, you think about what could happen in a dark theater like that. I mean, it's mortifying that nobody helps her, and they just think she's part of the show until they don't.
I think about that a lot because for our job, obviously, we go to a lot of screenings with people in costumes or Comic-Con and stuff like that, and it flashes through my brain a lot.
I mean, it goes back to the Final Destination effect, where there's so many little things where if something in a horror movie is executed to the best possible degree, that's what gets you looking around. I mean, thank God we have beautiful, loving dramas and romantic stories that hopefully achieve the same thing. So we're looking at the world and we're seeing all these
not just murder
things as well, but in particular with things like Scream for me and Final Destination, I look at certain things like, the go-to with Final Destination is the log truck. Anytime I pull my car behind some sort of truck with anything that could fly off of it and impale me, I'm like, I should move around that.
I can't even tell you how many things those films have made me suspicious of.
I never went in another tanning bed. True story.
I've never been in one, but that will never happen now.
I probably would have kicked that habit for many, many reasons, but being in high school, that was a thing. Going tanning, and I paid for it. Here's a funny story. I don't know if I've ever told you this story.
Okay.
This is so not horror related, but I guess we're talking about Final Destination 3 now. So one of the last times that I went in a tanning bed was also because I had a bad experience, and I bought a package of 3 for prom because I had this beautiful like corset dress, and it happened to have been open kind of down the middle, so I had to be nice and tan for that. So I used 2 of them and not the third, and it was the day before prom, and I'm like, well, I paid for it, I should use it, right?
Never tan before prom, ladies. Never.
Don't do that. Don't over tan ever, whether it's in a tanning bed, which you shouldn't be in anyway, or in the sun. I got such a terrible reaction, and it was so itchy. And I remember the night before prom, I got 0 sleep because I was sleeping on ice packs, and then I spent the entire prom in this beautiful dress, being like scratching. It was awful. I just created this terrible visual for everybody listening to this and watching this.
It's a horror podcast. They can handle it.
Yeah, so for that reason and because of Final Destination 3, I never used a tanning bed ever again.
Well, this is a valuable, teachable moment, folks. If you're having your wedding, if you're having prom, don't do anything drastic the day before.
Don't do it.
You know how you look right now.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's never worth it. So many bad spray tans I saw before prom because they were like, I just want to be a little bit sunnier.
Spray tans just never looked right to me.
Oh, they were big where I grew up.
But that scene in Final Destination 3 is absolutely mortifying. It's
one of the worst, I think, in the whole franchise for watching it. Like, ow.
It is. It's almost too well shot. Where not only are you, mortified by how everything is playing out in that sequence, but you are in the bed with them.
Yeah.
And it just sits there with them. Ooh.
And it's not just triggering the fear of burning alive, which is like the bad enough on its own, but it's also triggering a claustrophobic fear at the same time. It's a very good scare.
Oh, it is. It is. Before we veer
too far
into the next decade, I think we should rein it back in with the next thing on our list, because I think we both have a deep love for this movie. Do you see what I'm looking at?
I do.
It might be The Faculty.
Yeah.
So going back to the first viewing question, I'll never forget my first viewing of The Faculty because we were celebrating my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary in Longboat Key. My entire family was there. It was like really, I think the last time, me, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, we all got together and went somewhere together. Mm-hmm. And it was a rainy day. And I remember one rainy day there we saw Stepmom, which is the equivalent of a horror movie for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I won't watch that movie ever again, to the point that if I walk into a room and someone has it on, I will leave if they don't turn it off. But the other movie we saw on a rainy day was The Faculty. And that was one of those movies where I walked out of it and I immediately wanted to go right back in and watch it again. And I might have dragged family members and friends to see The Faculty in theaters many, many times. There is this infectious vibe with that group of characters, that setting, the idea, everything that I was just absolutely fascinated.
Absolutely the same. That was a huge obsession for me. That soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
I listened to that. That and Teaching Mrs. Tingle were like on my rotation that year.
I watched a lot of Teaching Mrs. Tingle.
The Faculty also, like, straight up, Josh Hartnett was my husband at that point in my life. We were wed, and it was a very happy relationship. I was obsessed with that man. And that double whammy of H20 and The Faculty in the same year, like, those are the only movies I cared about that summer. That's all I watched. Yeah. I only listened to those soundtracks. It was my whole life was with my husband, Josh Hartnett, that summer.
You were not alone, except I had 2 husbands that summer because I was caught in the middle, and I'm often caught in the middle between, like the hot bad boy and like the sweet nerd. So I was always like, one foot in Josh Hartnett world and one foot in Elijah Wood world.
Okay.
Because they're both quite charming in that movie.
Elijah Wood's a little peanut.
Like Casey eventually, rises to the occasion and he wins you over, but that's just a great ensemble across the board.
Oh, it really is.
The adult cast in that too. I mean, the Bebe Neuwirth.
Can you believe they got her to do that?
Oh my God!
How'd they do that?
I think I'm tangentially related to Bebe Neuwirth, where someone in my family married someone else that made her like a distant cousin, but then they got divorced, so technically we're not anymore.
No.
But I don't remember this, but my mom always used to tell me that she took us backstage on a Broadway show once, and
I love that.
That happened. I don't remember it. That's sad, but okay.
She's a queen.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got her, but I'm sure glad they did.
That's
Robert Patrick, terrifying.
Oh, yeah. He is so good in that.
Yeah.
That scene when they're all in the field and looking up at the rain and feeding their little alien specimens. Ooh. That one gets me.
All the adults are super chilling in that movie.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't get enough credit because it is straight up a ripoff of other movies, but like it's done really well to showcase the feeling of teenage isolation. You want to be accepted by your peers, but you also want to be an original. You want to get by the teachers, but you don't want their attention too much because then you're either in trouble or you have too much expectations on you. It's Robert Rodriguez did a really good job with it.
It gets at that idea with so many angles too, where you could see that in every single one of the characters, like by themselves. Forget the whole taking over your body thing, but you see it from that perspective. And then you also see it from everybody basically becoming this one hive mind of sorts, too. So when you start to layer everything, it makes that message even more effective, where it seeps in a way where you don't even realize it. Because also, that's a movie that just flies. Like, there's not a slow moment in that entire film, or at least in my mind.
I think it's aside from the Invasions of the Body Snatchers remake, I think it's the best non-title Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake.
I feel like because they reference it, I give them a pass.
Yeah. I mean, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they do it well.
That they do.
That's Kevin Williamson too, isn't it?
Did he write that one?
I think so. Let me Google that little nugget.
I should probably know that.
I know. We're talking about like 8 movies today.
I know. There's so many and I was trying to keep so many of the dates in mind too, because I started to go down the Halloween H20 rabbit hole and trying to figure out the legacy of everything, and just trying to connect the dots, and connecting the dots in a way where it shows you what came after it and why that came after it and what paves the way to the future, but also personal dots too, because every single one of these movies that we're listing right now, it goes back to very, very personal, meaningful memories.
Absolutely. Like such a formative time in our life.
Yeah, which is the perfect way to start talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Oh,
because that movie came at just the right time, and that was another obsession where I think it also happened to have been, for me at least, the perfect distance away from Scream in terms of it being a stepping stone, where whenever I think of Scream and seeing that for the first time, my next jump is always to I Know What You Did Last Summer. And, I'll admit that that's one on a rewatch, I don't think it holds up as well.
It's rough, man.
It's a tough thing to admit, because I have such vivid memories of loving it so much. And, rewatch. I'll never rewatch it again and not like it and have that take away from how important it used to be to me. But that is one where I have a tough time appreciating it, even when I throw in the nostalgia card.
It's not great. It's just not. I still enjoy it. If I put it on, I know what I'm getting into now, and I'm gonna enjoy it. And I've listened to that terrible Flock of Seagulls cover, and I'm just gonna really lean into that mood. It's sad though, because there's so much there that could be better. Like they're all interested, understandably, given the audience they were targeting, in these romances, which Ray is the worst boyfriend.
Oh my God,
I hate him so much.
Yeah, he's not good. And
he's so bad.
I don't want to knock Freddie, because I think he was probably doing what he was told, but like all of just like the dumb Ray expressions. I mean, just look at the poster. That's the expression he makes the entire movie.
It's fair. And so they're all invested in these toxic relationships, which is fine. But they totally miss out on like the root of this friendship between the two girls, which is the most interesting part of the film, is whenever they're on screen together after, even before the incident, but especially after. That's when the film's most alive. And Helen, actually, for me, is what makes the movie. Sarah Michelle Gellar, like once she's,
words right out of my mouth.
Once she's gone, it's kind of a bust.
Because going back to the idea of what's seared into your brain from this movie, the two things that I pick are her scenes. It's when her hair is chopped off in the middle of the night, which I've ever since I've been convinced one day I'm gonna wake up with no bangs or something. I'm gonna wake up with my worst nightmare, and it's Courtney Cox baby bangs from Scream 3. So, like sometimes I do, how people dream about their teeth falling out, because that's a real thing that I have. Another nightmare I have is where I go and get my bangs trimmed and they trim them too short.
Amazing. I think you should make a spoof short about waking up with baby bangs.
I could sell that very well. But it goes back to, the hair cutting scene, and then also her death scene.
It's fantastic.
That to me still does play very, very well.
It's great. And that's another, we weren't used to seeing Sarah Michelle Gellar in that situation. We were used to seeing her turn around, punch somebody, and they fly into a wall. So to see her sort of stumbling down the alleyway and so close, and I think that's a really well shot scene that still holds up and works.
And it goes all over the place too. I mean, it's a pretty extensive set piece. Yeah,
it is, and I think it's like over 10 minutes if I remember from my last watch. So I think that's the highlight of the film, is that one big, huge set piece.
Did anything really strike you in I Still Know What You Did Last Summer?
Jack Black with dreads stands out.
Yeah, that does.
No, I really don't like that movie,
really?
if I'm being honest. Yeah, I remember even hating it when it came out, and rewatching it was just like abysmal.
I liked it more back in the day. It's not one that I go back to rewatch, but I guess there's certain moments in that I kind of remember, but I think the main thing that I remember is the worst part of it, which is the reveal of who the bad guy is. Will Benson.
Fuck. Come on, guys.
So stupid.
Who's responsible for this?
Yeah.
It's not
that
okay.
one I just there's no excuse.
It's really
for that.
bad.
It's like, the idea of Jennifer Love Hewitt, like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a legacy type charm to that, where every single time I see somebody else do that, it brings me right back to that. But the idea of like that line, like, there's nothing to it. There's nothing to it. It's just silly and stupid, and nobody ever tried to copy that. But still,
it's bad.
Even when I see, people stumble out, I'm like, what do you want from me? I'm like, no. I think that moment is super memorable because it's so cheesy and out of place. It's not because it worked really well, and I know what you did last summer. And it shocks me that people still copy that.
Yeah.
But they do.
They do. They go for it a lot, actually.
I was trying to remember one recent movie I saw where someone just did that, and now it's escaping me. But it's like another movie where someone like steps out into the middle of and
screams to the great nothing.
Screams to nothing. What do you want? I can't believe I can't remember what it is. I'm trying to like rack my brain.
It's like one of those
now.
things in movies. This is another thing that has to die. It's like, what do you think about it? You, me, us. That phrase, you, me, us, has to go. It's in too many movies and it never works.
Yeah, I could do without that.
The other really bad thing about I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, since we were talking about shitty boyfriends, Brandy's boyfriend in that movie is a monster. Yeah. He's awful.
Yeah, he's pretty bad.
This whole franchise has terrible boyfriends.
Terrible boyfriends, and not the strongest characters, period.
No.
I feel like Helen's the only one who deserves a little credit, but I can't really think of a great one otherwise.
No, Julie's just a soppy, wet blanket. She's nothing.
Yep. I think we need to make a transition into something with strong characters.
Yes.
And you know where I'm going next. It's The Craft.
The
Craft. The Craft is one I adore. The Craft is one that my mom actually really liked.
Nice.
And the reason I watch The Craft a lot is because of her. And whenever it's on now, that's one of those movies. We have a long list of scary movies in the Nemiroff household that, if one person is watching it in one room, eventually all four of us will wind up in the same room. And The Craft is one of those movies.
Craft is great. Totally holds up. It has some like racial and class stuff that doesn't hold up great, but that when a movie's almost 20 years old, that happens. Oh my God, it's more than 20 years old.
It is more than 20. When you said that, I'm like, no.
We're so old. Anyway, otherwise, I think it holds up really well. It's still super tense. The performances are great. The characters are interesting. The friendships are, not that all teenage girl friendships are catty and backstabby, but that is certainly a part of going to high school and trying to fit in with whether it's the cool girls or the weird girls. That is an element of it. And that movie, like, had such a huge effect on my embrace of alternative spiritualities, because I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. Mm-hmm. That between that and Buffy really opened my mind up to look at other things and learn more about the world, which was a pretty big impact on my life. It was a huge movie. It's still a huge movie for me.
You don't really get those kinds of wonderful experiences when you're just allowed to do anything.
Yeah,
watch anything you want.
No.
The part of the craft that I think influenced me the most, or got the wheels in my head turning, especially as a kid in high school, was the very end, when the other two are trying to be, like they know what she's capable of at that point, and they're trying to apologize, and just her reaction to that whole situation, where it's like, anybody could snap their fingers in that moment and basically have two little lackeys there, but it's all about her staying true to who she is.
And she knows she got the power.
And that end moment kind of seals the deal. And, I was the kind of kid in high school where I was friends with everybody. I didn't have that one clique that, when you were part of that group of friends, you felt like more powerful. I was just kind of like a social butterfly buzzing with everybody.
That sounds about right.
And in that moment, I think that was one of those things that, it kind of triggered, just be true to you, and if that means wanting to be a little bit of everything, so be it.
I think it's a really great empowerment film, and it had that same effect in different ways on both of us, to be more empowered in our own, like, it empowered me to explore my spirituality, to explore my friendships, and it empowered you to be outside of a clique. And
what's going on with the remake, or the TV series? Is that what it is?
Or
am I thinking of Heathers? Heathers was the failed TV series.
Yeah.
I think Lee Janiak, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but I don't think she's attached anymore.
Ah, that makes me a lot less excited.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see if that comes through. I'm not sure how long this 90s nostalgia wave is going to keep going, or if people maybe miss the boat a little bit.
What do you mean? Because they already announced a Sandlot prequel? Is that what's tipping you off?
I think the big 90s nostalgia wave was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And studios are just now catching up mostly.
That could be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the craft isn't really something I would ever want to see remade, but I wouldn't mind seeing, that same power set applied to a different group of characters.
I don't mind the idea of a remake on that one at all, actually. Just it just seems like one of 4 teenage witches trying to figure out how to be friends and find their power is really adaptable to any sort of culture or time period.
See, but taking it to a different culture or a different time period. Not that they would necessarily, I have a hard time with most movies justifying the copy-paste reboot,
right,
where you're revisiting the same characters with different actors. I think that the idea that you basically just articulated can go to any place in the world.
Yeah.
It could go to any time period you want, whether you go way, way back or set it in modern times, and that immediately opens the door to new creative opportunities with, maybe using the term remaking the craft, but with different characters and a fresh setting and fresh ideas and maybe fresh goals too. But the constant retread without ever introducing something new or taking the bad, I want to think of a better word, but like the bad route, because all I could think of right now when I'm talking about this is Nightmare on Elm Street, where
the bad route,
where sometimes they'll lean too heavily on backstory in these remakes in order to justify making another one, where there's so many more like thoughtful, insightful, meaningful ways to add that extra layer to something familiar that worked in the past. That, I don't want to point a finger and say that filmmakers out there that worked on those types of films are being lazy about it, but that's kind of why we have the term cash grab used and thrown around, is because they feel like, you took the easy route. You took the easy route when you could have come up with something a little more creative.
Definitely, and that's more and more something we're seeing with IP, is just like, well, we've got this title, what do we do with it? Yeah. And then it comes down to the creative process of whether they do something more interesting, like they're saying, or if they just cash grab it.
Actually, this is a good place to wrap this up. So, given our love of some of these 90s movies, what do you hope that the industry takes from that period and kind of seeps into what we're getting right now?
That's a good question. And while I ponder it, I'm going to say real quickly, because we didn't get to it, Urban Legend. Underrated, totally solid slasher movie.
Urban Legend, I like Urban Legend. I haven't revisited it in a very, very long time. And it for whatever reason, because, we talked about this on the last episode. I put a very high value on rewatchability with movies. And I got into that cycle with my 90s slasher films. And for whatever reason, that one never got into the mix. But I do remember appreciating it when I first had watched it.
Well, maybe because it's college. But
maybe I was only into high school things at that point.
But it is really solid, and it's pretty brutal. And I like Tara Reid's character is really fascinating. But
I think I know part of the reason why I don't rewatch it.
Why?
There's one scene. Do you know what scene I'm talking about?
No.
Like what'll make me super sensitive?
Animals?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
I
feel you.
About.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So thinking about Urban Legend and what I wish they would take from it, and all of them, I guess, is this return to empathy for the victims. If you make a movie where we care about the characters, we're in it to the end.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's coming after them and what mask. It's because we're in their story, and we are watching essentially their survival film or failure to survive film. There was a lot of interesting things they were doing with female characters back then that I feel like a lot of movies maybe try to do but get wrong now, or they do it too on the nose. And Sidney Prescott was just a great character. It wasn't because she was this super intense feminist, or because she was like the best student in school or the best singer on the choir or anything like that. She was just a great character. So those would be the things I'd like to see come back.
Yeah, I think that I would go a similar route where, a lot of the movies that I have the strongest attachments to have either one thing or the other, if not both. And it is really strong characters. I mean, people that feel real, like I could know them and I like them and I'm rooting for them. And, that doesn't mean I have to box it into like only people I like can be strong characters. But, and even when you're talking about tone and style, it could have a surreal quality to it, but you could still feel like you know that individual. And I think that's what I'm drawn to, where I feel like I know a fully fleshed out character. Sometimes I think that could be more powerful than even the greatest high concept, but really smart concepts get me hooked in a flash. It happened with Final Destination, and it started to happen with The Purge. I think The Purge lost me a little, but being drawn to a really cool concept like that, it happened with It Follows. I'm fascinated by the idea of It Follows. So when you come up with a really great idea like that, the best thing in the world to end up with is strong characters paired with that. And I feel like that's one of the things that could have a movie go on to become a classic.
That, and one last thing I'll add, when you say tone and concept, and I think about the great horror movies of the last couple years, something we're missing, I think, is a good sense of humor without being a horror comedy. I'd like to see a little more levity.
Yeah.
I'd make an argument that Hereditary is actually fucking hilarious, but there's not a lot of jokes in it. It's a dark humor, and I'd like to see a little more snappy humor in my comedy.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I mean, with Hereditary, I think it's almost like that knee-jerk reaction to seeing something terrifying, where you go like, whoa, and like you have to laugh it off before
I think there are really smart moments of comedy from Toni Collette where she is playing humor.
Okay. I'm going to have to watch it again with that in mind, because I can't think of anything specific.
Okay.
But yeah, that's our conversation on 90s teen slasher flicks. A special conversation, given how personal it is to me, and I don't want to speak for you, but it does seem that
absolutely
way for you as well.
It seems very much that we were born out of the same sort of ilk of horror fanatics.
Yeah, and that's a badge I wear pretty proudly, and I've got very high hopes that, good or bad, that the future of horror will always take from that and learn from that and kind of pave the way to new assortments of creativity while holding true to, what turned me into a horror lover overall.
Yeah.
All right, so now that we're going to wrap this up, where can everybody find you on the interwebs?
You can find me every day on Collider.com. You can find me on Twitter at Haleigh Fouch, and you can find me on Instagram at Haystack McGroovy.
And I am on Twitter and Instagram at PNemeroff. Before we close this out, just want to say a huge thank you to the very warm welcome we received on the podcast network and on the Collider Podcast YouTube channel as well. This show was really important for us to get going, and we do adore doing it. So the fact that everybody opened their arms and welcomed us, whether you were a horror fan or not, and all the feedback is so important. Feedback, whether it's good or critical, it really does mean a lot to keep that conversation going. So keep chiming in and chime in on the topics that we're bringing up too.
Please.
We really, I mean, this is just an hour, but it's only because it can just be an hour. We want to keep talking about this stuff with you guys all day long. So hit us up on social media. Thank you again for watching this episode. You have officially survived the witching hour.